The night my parents kicked me out, it was raining. Not the light kind of rain that feels peaceful. The heavy kind that soaks through your clothes in seconds. I remember standing on the porch with a backpack and a duffel bag. Everything I owned was inside those two bags. My father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. My mother was behind him, refusing to look me in the eyes. "You're 18 now," my father said. "You need to learn how the real world works." The door closed before I could say anything else. I slept on a bus bench that night. 8 years later, the phone rang while I was sitting in my office. The caller ID showed my mother's name. We hadn't spoken in years. When I answered, the first thing she said was something I never expected to hear. "Lucas, we need your help." My name is Lucas Bennett. I'm 26 now, but this story really started the day I turned 18. Growing up, my family always looked normal from the outside. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. My father worked as a mechanic. My mother managed a small clothing store at the local mall. We weren't rich, but we had a stable life. At least that's what people saw from the outside. Inside the house, things worked a little differently. My parents believed in something they called tough love. According to them, struggle built character. Comfort made people weak. They repeated that idea constantly while I was growing up. If you want something in life, you earn it. Nothing should ever be handed to you. At first, I believed them. I worked hard in school. I stayed out of trouble. I took a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own clothes and gas. But there was something strange about the way their philosophy worked inside our house. The rules always seemed to apply more strictly to me than to anyone else, especially when it came to my younger brother, Tyler. Tyler was 2 years younger than me. Where I was quiet and responsible, Tyler was impulsive and reckless. He skipped school. He crashed his first car 3 months after getting his license. He got into fights at school more times than I could count, and every time something went wrong, my parents found a way to explain it away. "He's just going through a phase. He needs time to mature. He'll figure things out." Those were the same parents who once grounded me for a month because I came home 20 minutes past curfew. Back then, I didn't fully understand the pattern forming inside our family. I just assumed life wasn't fair sometimes, but fairness wasn't really the issue. What I didn't realize yet was that my parents had already decided something about their two sons. Tyler was the one who needed protection. I was the one who was supposed to survive on my own. And the day I turned 18, they decided it was time to test that theory. My 18th birthday didn't start like something important was about to happen. It felt like a normal Tuesday. I woke up early because I had a shift at the grocery store where I worked after school. The house was quiet when I walked into the kitchen. My mother was drinking coffee at the table and reading something on her phone. "Happy birthday," she said without looking up. "Thanks," I replied. That was the entire celebration. No cake, no plans for dinner, nothing special. I wasn't really surprised. Birthdays in our house had always been simple, but there was something different in the air that morning. Something I couldn't quite identify yet. When I got home from work later that afternoon, both of my parents were sitting in the living room waiting. That alone felt unusual. My father usually didn't get home until later in the evening. Tyler was sitting on the couch playing a game on his phone. The moment I walked into the room, my father muted the television. "Sit down," he said. His voice was calm, but serious. I sat in the chair across from them, confused. "What's going on?" I asked. My father leaned forward slightly and rested his elbows on his knees. "Well," he said, "you're 18 now." I nodded slowly. "Yeah." He exchanged a quick glance with my mother. Then he continued, "That means you're an adult." The conversation still didn't make sense yet. "I guess so," I said. My father took a deep breath. "Adults take care of themselves." Something in my stomach tightened when I heard that sentence, because suddenly the direction of the conversation became clear. "You're not serious," I said quietly. My mother finally looked up at me. We think it's time for you to start building your own life. I looked from her to my father, waiting for the part where they explained the plan. Maybe they wanted me to contribute rent. Maybe they wanted me to start looking for an apartment. But my father shook his head slightly. You have until tonight, he said. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. Until tonight for what? I asked. To pack your things, he replied. The words landed like something heavy dropping on the floor. You're kicking me out? My father's expression didn't change. We're helping you grow up. Tyler looked up from his phone briefly, then went back to scrolling like nothing important was happening. My mind was racing now. I just graduated high school 2 weeks ago, I said. I'm already working. I'm saving money. I'm trying to figure things out. My father shook his head again. You'll figure it out faster if you're on your own. I turned toward my mother, hoping for some kind of support. She avoided my eyes. Your father thinks this will be good for you, she said quietly. Good for me. The phrase sounded almost surreal. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. My father stood up from the couch. That's something adults solve for themselves. Then he walked toward the hallway like the conversation was finished. I sat there in silence for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Tyler looked up at me and shrugged. Guess you're moving out, he said casually. Then he went back to his phone. By sunset that evening, everything I owned fit into 2 bags. A backpack and an old duffel bag from high school sports, clothes, a few books, my laptop, and about $600 in savings from my part-time job. When I carried the bags to the front door, my parents were already waiting there. My father opened the door and stepped aside. The rain had started outside. Heavy. Cold. I stood on the porch for a moment, hoping someone might say something different. Maybe tell me this was temporary. Maybe offer some kind of plan. But nothing changed. You'll thank us one day, my father said. Then the door closed behind me. And just like that, I was on my own. The rain didn't stop after my parents closed the door. If anything, it got heavier. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, hoping the door might open again. Maybe my father would say it was a mistake. Maybe my mother would come outside and tell me to come back in. But the house stayed silent. The lights inside were still on, but no one moved. Eventually, I stepped off the porch and started walking. I didn't really have a destination. When people say someone was kicked out, it sounds dramatic. But the reality is much quieter. You just start walking with everything you own on your back, and you try to figure out what to do next. The nearest place that made sense was the grocery store where I worked. It was about a mile away. By the time I got there, my clothes were completely soaked. The store was already closed for the night. The parking lot lights were still on, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I stood there for a moment wondering if I should knock on the door and explain what had happened. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or embarrassment. I didn't want my coworkers seeing me like that. So I kept walking. There was a bus stop across the street from the store. Just a small metal bench under a plastic cover. It wasn't much, but it was dry. I sat down and dropped my bags next to my feet. Cars passed occasionally on the road nearby. None of them slowed down. None of them noticed the 18-year-old sitting on the bench with his entire life in 2 bags. I remember looking at my phone to check the time. 11:42 p.m. I still had to work the next morning at 7 a.m. That realization almost made me laugh. Life hadn't paused just because everything had changed. My shift was still waiting for me. I leaned back against the cold plastic wall of the bus shelter and closed my eyes for a moment. Sleep came in short, uncomfortable bursts. Every time a car passed, the headlights flashed through the shelter and woke me up again. By morning, my neck felt stiff, and my clothes still smelled like rain. At 6:15 a.m., I picked up my bags and walked across the street to the grocery store. The morning manager, Carl, unlocked the doors a few minutes later. He looked at me standing there with the bags and frowned. "You going somewhere?" he asked. For a second, I considered lying, but I was too tired to invent a story. "My parents kicked me out last night," I said. Carl stared at me for a moment, trying to decide if I was joking. Then he looked at the bags again and realized I wasn't. Jesus, he muttered. You sleep out here? Bus stop, I said. He shook his head slowly and unlocked the door. Come inside, he said. Get something to eat before your shift. That breakfast, 2 eggs and a piece of toast from the deli counter, was the first moment I realized something important. The world outside my family was very different from the world inside it. Carl didn't know me very well. We had worked together for maybe 6 months, but he still helped without hesitation. Meanwhile, the people who had raised me for 18 years had closed the door and gone to sleep like nothing had happened. That morning, I worked my entire shift like normal, stocking shelves, helping customers, smiling at people who had no idea where I had spent the night before. When my shift ended at 3 in the afternoon, I sat in the break room staring at my phone. $600 in savings, 2 bags of clothes, no place to live, no plan. Most people would probably panic in that situation. And part of me did, but another part of me felt something else. Something quieter. Determination. Because if my parents wanted to prove that I could survive on my own, then I was going to survive. After my shift ended that afternoon, Carl asked me to stay for a minute. He leaned against the break room table and crossed his arms. So, what's your plan? He asked. I stared at the floor for a moment before answering. I'm still figuring that out. Carl nodded slowly like he expected that answer. You got anywhere to stay tonight? He asked. I shook my head. Not really. Carl rubbed his chin for a moment, thinking. Then he said something that changed the direction of my life in a way I couldn't have predicted. My brother owns a small auto shop on the edge of town, he said. They've got a storage room in the back with an old couch. I looked up at him. You serious? I asked. Carl shrugged. It's not a hotel, he said. But it's dry and it's safe. For the first time since the night before, I felt something close to relief. That would help a lot, I said. Carl grabbed his keys from the table. Come on, he said. I'll drive you there after we close. That evening, I rode with Carl across town to a small building surrounded by chain-link fencing and stacks of old tires. The sign above the garage door read, Harrison Auto Repair. Inside the shop, engines sat half disassembled under bright fluorescent lights. Carl introduced me to his brother Mike, a tall man with grease on his hands and a skeptical look on his face. This is the kid I told you about, Carl said. Parents kicked him out. Mike looked at me for a few seconds, then he nodded once. You know anything about cars? He asked. Not much, I admitted. Mike shrugged. You can learn. Then he pointed toward a small room in the back of the building. There's a couch in there, he said. It's ugly, but it works. I stepped inside the room and dropped my bags on the floor. The couch really was ugly. The fabric was torn in a few places, and one of the cushions sagged in the middle. But to me, it looked better than any hotel bed. That night, I slept for almost 10 hours straight. The next morning, Mike knocked on the door of the storage room. If you're going to stay here, he said, you might as well work. That's how I ended up with 2 jobs. During the mornings, I worked at the grocery store. In the afternoons and evenings, I helped around the auto shop. At first, the work was simple. Sweeping floors, organizing tools, running parts between workstations. But Mike noticed something about me after a few weeks. I paid attention. Whenever he repaired an engine or replaced a transmission, I watched carefully. I asked questions. Eventually, he started letting me help with small repairs. Then bigger ones. 6 months later, I was working on engines alongside the other mechanics. It wasn't the life I had imagined while I was still in high school, but it was a life I had built myself. Slowly, my savings started to grow. The $600 I had when I left my parents' house turned into $2,000, then $5,000. Eventually, I moved out of the storage room and rented a tiny studio apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much bigger than a garage, but it was mine. Over the next few years, something interesting happened. Mike began trusting me with more responsibility at the shop. managing customers, ordering parts, handling repairs on my own. By the time I turned 24, he made me an offer I never expected. He wanted me to become his business partner. Not an employee, a partner. We expanded the shop the following year. More space, more mechanics, more customers. The business grew faster than either of us predicted, and somewhere along the way, the kid who slept on a bus bench with 2 bags became someone who owned half of a successful auto repair business. I hadn't spoken to my parents in years, not because of some dramatic argument, but because silence slowly replaced whatever connection we once had. Until one afternoon, while I was sitting in my office at the shop, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in a very long time. Mom. I stared at my phone for a few seconds before answering. My mother's name on the screen felt strange after so many years. Part of me wondered if I should just ignore it. After all, she hadn't tried to contact me in nearly 8 years. But curiosity won. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. Hello? For a moment there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her voice. Lucas? It sounded older than I remembered. Softer. Almost uncertain. Yeah, I said. It's me. Another pause followed, like she was trying to figure out how to begin the conversation. How have you been? She asked. The question felt almost absurd. 8 years of silence followed by small talk. I'm fine, I replied. Working. She hesitated again. Then she asked something else. Your father told me you own a business now. So that was how she found out. Small towns have a way of sharing information whether you want them to or not. Something like that, I said. She took a slow breath before speaking again. Lucas, we need your help. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not curiosity. Not reconnection. Help. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of my office. What kind of help? I asked. Her voice grew quieter. It's about Tyler. I wasn't surprised to hear his name. In our family, most problems eventually circled back to him. What happened? I asked. He's in trouble, she said. That description could mean a lot of things. Tyler had always had a talent for finding trouble. Define trouble, I said. She hesitated again before answering. Legal trouble. That got my attention. What did he do? He got involved with the wrong people, she said. That sentence sounded vague on purpose. What did he do? I repeated. This time her voice cracked slightly. He owes money. How much? I asked. Another long pause. $30,000. The number hung in the air between us. $30,000. More money than anyone in my family had ever talked about casually before. What kind of money does he owe? I asked carefully. People he shouldn't owe money to, she replied. I understood immediately. Gambling, or something close to it. Why are you calling me? I asked. My mother finally said the words directly. We were hoping you could help him. There it was again. The same pattern from years earlier. Tyler created the problem. Lucas was supposed to solve it. I stayed quiet for a moment, listening to the faint sound of her breathing through the phone. Do you remember the night you kicked me out? I asked. She didn't answer right away. I remember, she said softly. You said it was time for me to learn how the real world works. Yes, she said. And I did learn, I continued. I looked around my office at the shop floor visible through the glass window. Mechanics moving between cars, tools clanking against metal, customers waiting at the front counter. I had built all of it step by step, without anyone's help. You were right, I said. The real world teaches people very quickly. My mother sounded nervous now. Lucas. But I continued before she could finish. Maybe it's time Tyler learns too. After that phone call, I thought about the situation for 2 days, not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to understand exactly what was happening. $30,000 wasn't a small problem, and the way my mother avoided details during the call bothered me. Something about the story felt incomplete. On the third day, my phone rang again. It was my father this time. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me again. "Lucas," he said as soon as I picked up. His voice sounded older too, rougher than I remembered. "Your mother said you two talked." "We did," I replied. He didn't waste time with small talk. "She probably told you Tyler needs help." "Yes," I said. Another short silence passed between us. Then he said something unexpected. "Can we meet?" I wasn't sure why, but I agreed. We chose a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truck drivers stopped for coffee and pie. When I arrived, my parents were already sitting in a booth near the window. Seeing them again after so many years felt strange. They looked smaller somehow, older. Time had softened the confidence they once carried. My father stood up when I approached the table. For a moment it looked like he might try to hug me. Instead, he just nodded and sat back down. I slid into the seat across from them. The waitress came by and poured coffee into 3 cups without asking questions. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Tyler got involved with some people who loan money," he said. "That's what Mom told me." He nodded slowly. "At first it was small amounts," he continued. "Then it got bigger." "How big?" I asked. My father looked down at the table. 30,000. The same number again. But this time I noticed something in his voice. Shame. "What happens if he doesn't pay?" I asked. My parents exchanged a quick glance. "That's the problem," my mother said quietly. "They're not exactly patient people." So it was worse than simple debt. Much worse. I took a sip of my coffee and studied their faces. For the first time in years, the power dynamic between us felt completely different. They were the ones asking for help now. "You know," I said slowly, "when I was 18, I asked you where I was supposed to go." Neither of them responded. "You told me adults figure things out for themselves." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That was different," he muttered. Different. The same word again. The same excuse people use when they want rules to apply differently depending on the situation. I leaned back in the booth and folded my arms. "So, what exactly are you asking from me?" My mother answered this time. "We were hoping you could loan him the money." Loan. An interesting choice of words, because we all knew they didn't really mean loan. They meant solve the problem. Fix Tyler's mistakes the way they always had. Only this time, they needed someone else to do it. I looked out the diner window for a moment. Cars passed slowly on the road outside. People living ordinary lives without realizing how strange this moment felt. Then I looked back at my parents. "Do you know where Tyler is right now?" I asked. My father nodded. "He's staying at home." Of course he was. The same house where I had been told to leave with 2 bags in the rain. The irony almost made me smile. After a long moment of silence, I spoke again. "I'll think about it," I said. My parents both looked relieved immediately, like the problem was already halfway solved. But the truth was, I wasn't thinking about whether to help Tyler. I was thinking about something else entirely. 2 days after the meeting at the diner, I drove past my parents' house for the first time in years. Nothing about the place had changed. The same mailbox, the same cracked driveway, the same front porch where I once stood with 2 bags in the rain. For a moment I sat in the car with the engine off, looking at the house. Not with anger, just observation. 8 years earlier I had left that house with almost nothing. Now I owned half of a growing business. Life has a strange sense of balance sometimes. I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching through the window. "Lucas," she said quietly, My father was standing in the living room behind her. Tyler was sitting on the couch. He looked older, but not necessarily wiser. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. "So, you're the hero now?" he said. The tone in his voice still carried the same arrogance I remembered from years ago. I ignored the comment and walked into the living room. The house smelled exactly the same as it did when I lived there. Laundry detergent and old carpet. My father crossed his arms nervously. "Did you think about it?" he asked. "I did," I said. All three of them were watching me now, waiting for the same outcome they had always expected from me. Fix the problem, make things easier, be the responsible one. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. My father leaned forward slightly when he saw it. Inside the envelope was a check, but it wasn't for $30,000. It was for $500. I handed it to my father. He looked confused when he saw the amount. "What's this?" he asked. "It's help," I said calmly, "but not the kind you're expecting." My father frowned. "That doesn't even touch the debt." "I know," I replied. Tyler stood up from the couch, clearly irritated now. "So, what's the point of this?" he said. I looked directly at him. "The point is that sometimes people learn the most when things don't get fixed for them." The room went quiet. My mother looked hurt. My father looked frustrated. Tyler looked angry. But none of them interrupted. "When I was 18, I continued, you told me the real world would teach me how to survive." I glanced at my father. "You were right." Then I looked back at Tyler. "Now it's his turn." Tyler scoffed. "So you're just going to let me deal with this alone?" I nodded. "That's how adults learn." The words were almost identical to the ones my father had used years earlier. My father lowered his eyes when he realized that. For the first time since I walked into the house, none of them had a response, because they all understood something important. The rules they created had finally come back around, and this time, they applied to everyone. The night my parents kicked me out, they said the real world would teach me how to survive. They thought it would break me. Instead, it built me. And years later, when they came back asking for help, I realized something simple. The real world doesn't just teach survival. Sometimes it teaches accountability too.